Good morning and welcome to our first Friday Q&A for the knit along. I am wearing my sweater I knit last year for the knit along, which is Velour. It's gonna be about 50 degrees here today, so it feels like summer. But thank you so much for joining the knit along. I hope you're already in there chatting, making friends with your sweaters and your shawls. We did a forum for each this year. I really love a knit along. I feel like it's a great place to come together, cheer each other on, get through maybe some of those old works in progress that we cast on and didn't finish. And I actually met one of my best friends through a knit along. So I hope that you are all enjoying it. I'm gonna pop over there as soon as I finish this video. So let's jump right in. A bunch of you filled out the Google form. Thank you so much with some of your questions. And so I'm gonna try to get to at least about 5 of them today. I have them up right here in front of me. So the first question was, what advice can you give about counting the number of stitches on your needles? I'm working on the Shifty sweater right now and seem to recount stitches over and over again with slightly different numbers each time. Any suggestions about enjoying the process of counting more would be great too. That's a great question. I actually do have a couple tricks. I am gonna grab my knitting bag quick. So I'm one of those people that tends to doubt myself. And then I feel like I'm recounting, very similar to what it sounds like you're experiencing. So I have a couple things I do, depending on what I happen to have floating around in my knitting bag at the time. Sometimes I will just simply place a little stitch marker. I love these little guys because they don't flop around on my needle too much. These ones are Cocoa Knits, I think. But I like that size depending on what size needle you're using. And I'll place these maybe every 10 to 20 stitches. That way you can just count chunks of stitches. Otherwise, like let's say I'm casting on a sweater that has 200 stitches. I'll actually use my row counter and click it every 10 stitches. So that way I'm just counting to 10. I don't get into the 70s and go, wait, was I in the 70s or the 60s? So I love doing that because it's just really easy for me to do it that way. This is also Cocoa Knits. This is their row counter. I really like it because it has an audible click, which helps me remember if I did it or not. And then I also like that it has a little locking mechanism on the bottom. So when you throw it into your knitting bag, it's not accidentally clicking away. I really love row counters. Again, I doubt myself, so I prefer that on my projects. I never have to guess where I am. And then it does double duty when I'm counting stitches. And for projects that are maybe a little more complicated, cable, lace patterns, things like that, I definitely utilize stitch markers a whole bunch because it's way easier for me to look at little segments of stitches and check 10 to 20 stitches. Okay, I did everything right for that lace pattern repeat or whatever it may be, instead of having to go back. If you've ever been doing, let's say, a lace edge on a shawl and you realize you get to the end and you're off somewhere, it's so much easier if you've broken up those segments with stitch markers to just quickly look at each one to make sure it's right instead of having to go through stitch by stitch. So really use your stitch markers. They're so helpful. Okay. My next question, favorite interchangeable circular needle. So I love circular interchangeable needles. I actually only use circular needles. I don't use straights or double pointed. It's just personal preference. And one of the reasons I prefer that is back when I used to travel a lot for my job, I wanted to know that I had everything I needed with me. And, oh, here it is. So with interchangeable needles, you know you have all these different lengths cords, all these needle tips. So no matter what project you're doing or where you are in your project, if you use more than one needle size, like a sweater, and different cord lengths, like you do in sweaters, then you have everything you need. So I am a big fan of interchangeable needles. I keep them in here. This is my Maxwell from Magpie Fibers. I really love this one. It's thin, like it's about the size of a book. So again, for me traveling, I'm always, even just around my house, I'm always carrying my knitting bag. So I always have this in here. I'll open it up for you guys. I'll lift it up. So that has all my needle tips and cords. So some of you are gonna right off the bat probably be able to recognize my favorites are ChiaoGoo's. The reason for that is they do have nice, like a nice sharp tip, and it's really about the cords for me. So their cords are so nice and flexible. They never get like a bend or a kink. They really stay, they don't twirl up on each other. Like if you've ever been knitting and you have a cord that stays in a spiral, it's a little frustrating or annoying. So the cord is what sold me on these ones. I also like their price point. I think is really reasonable for what you get. I always say when I was a beginner knitter and I was really getting into it, I wish somebody had told me to buy interchangeable needles, because it gets really expensive to start buying fixed needles again and again with all these different cord lengths. So I think at the end of the day, it ends up saving you money. Oh, the only thing sometimes I hear with ChiaoGoo or Haya is some people were like, oh, I feel like the tip untwists on me. So you have to get, let me get my little notions bag again. Oh, there it is. So you have to lock that tip on. So they have these little, they're like a little tiny thing that you use for a jar to open it up. And you have to put your little key in. I have one right here. It's just a blocking T-pin. So you put that in the little hole in the needle tip, and then you twist with this, and it will not ever come undone until you use this to unlock it. So that's the only trick there. I know you can buy them if your set doesn't come with them. So that's my favorite. And I've tried a lot of sets. I prefer a long tip, but I think I'm a little bit, no, I prefer a short tip, and I think I'm a little rare in that. I think a lot of people like the longer tips. You can usually get between a 4-inch tip and a 5-inch tip. Again, for me, I want to have everything I need right there ready to go. And if I want to do a hat, that 5-inch tip's too long. It makes it really hard to, like it won't be a nice smooth circle. So I do short tips because I know no matter length of my cord, it's going to work out for me. So ChiaoGoo's, my fave. If you prefer a wooden tip, I also like the Lykke, L-Y-K-K-E. Those ones are really nice for wooden. But I pretty much always use metal tips. I just like how my stitches slide along them. But maybe we'll talk about needle material on another Friday. All right. Do you have some tips about designing, especially about doing the math for other sizes? So yeah, let's talk about doing the math for other sizes. So that's called grading, and that's when we take our pattern and we add sizes. And I would say it's one of the trickiest parts to being a designer. I think for some people it's probably really intuitive. I have friends who it's their favorite part of the job. They really love math, and it's just super fun for them. For me, it can be really challenging, and it took me a while to learn how to do it. I started off by actually taking what did she call it? I think it's called like It's All in the Numbers. It's by J.C. Breyer, and it was taught at Stitches West. I took it about 5 or 6 years ago. So I know that JC has a website. I will add a link to that somewhere. But that really helped me because I wasn't very familiar with spreadsheets. And I do think that if you are going to get into designing and you need to grade a sweater, you got to learn how to use a spreadsheet. In my opinion, others might disagree with me, but it's going to make it so much easier. I do a minimum of 9 sizes for my sweaters, and it's just going to keep everything way more organized. And if you can take a class, if you're not already familiar with spreadsheets, there's all these formulas you can do to make that math a lot easier for the parts of the sweater that kind of change fairly evenly over all the sizes. So learning how to use spreadsheets. I'm not aware I know I get asked a lot if there's an app that you can just put your number in and they'll do it for you. I don't think so. I've never seen one. I've never used one. If anybody else has and they think it's working out well, feel free to add a comment. I find too, at least with the way I do my sizing, there's so many little kind of things you got to tweak across the sizes that I'm just not sure how an app would work for those, because it's not even per se. But I know that there are more classes and things coming out like that. That's what I would recommend doing. I basically took that Excel class and then I fumbled my way through it and practiced, and it does get easier. Like at first my brain hurt. I was just like, whoa. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. I mean, when I first started grading, it took me about a week to grade a sweater. Now I can do it in about a day, depending on how complicated the sweater is. And I will say it's probably like the thing I get the biggest sense of like accomplishment from is once I've finished one. But yeah, if anyone else has any great tips or resources they know of, I'd love if you added those comments. I don't have any books or anything that I used to do that. I kind of fumbled my way through and figured it out. But yeah, learn how to use a spreadsheet for sure and go from there. All right. Are you an English or continental knitter? Or do you chop and change between the two depending on the project? So I started as an English knitter. My grandma taught me when I was a kid, and I knit solely English style. If you're not familiar with English or continental styles, English is when you hold your working yarn in your right hand, and continental is when you hold your working yarn in your left hand. So yeah, I knit that way up until probably about 5 years ago. And I would just play with, I really liked to do stranded color work using both hands. For some reason, that just clicks really well in my brain. There's something about the balance of using both hands. And I think it was a really great way to enter into learning a different style of knitting, of holding that yarn, because I didn't overthink it, because my dominant hand that I was so used to using was still in play. So that I found really helpful. If you're interested in learning a new style of knitting, I highly recommend starting it that way. At least that's what worked for me. So from there, I began teaching quite a bit, and I learned very quickly that students needed to see the stitch demonstrated in the way that they knit. It's really confusing if you're trying to learn a new knitting stitch and the person is demonstrating it in continental if you knit English, or vice versa. So I then made it a priority to really become proficient in continental. And then one day I realized I always picked up my knitting continental. So it wasn't a deliberate choice I made to switch. I firmly believe that if you enjoy the way you knit, if your hands feel good, if you like the fabric you're creating, you do not need to push yourself to learn a different way to do it. The pros to it is it's fun. At least I thought it was fun. It can be a little frustrating and it takes a long time. If you are interested in learning a new way, I think that was one of the bigger takeaways for me, is I wanted it to be really fast, but you're kind of going back to beginner where your muscle memory has to reestablish itself. So take your time with it. I would actually always have a continental project going that I picked up when I wanted to practice, and it was an easier project without complicated stitches. And then when I just wanted to be able to get into my groove, I would have my project that I was knitting English style. Another benefit I did find was after 20 years of knitting English, when I did accidentally switch to continental, my hands felt a lot better, because I think that all that time of knitting a lot, that repetitive strain, it all got relieved when my hands got to move a little bit differently. So I do think it's really nice in that sense. And it's a fun challenge. But again, if you like the way you knit, it's great. As long as you're making fabric you like, that's all that matters. All right, so this last one's a big one, and we are closing up on time here. So we'll see how quick I can do this. All right, ease. I am always confused about ease and sweater patterns. Is it built in or do I add it? If my bust measurement is 40, do I pick the size closest to 40 or pick 40 plus ease? Some patterns make this clear, but not most. Please pick this topic. So I actually just did a big write-up about this in my newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to my newsletter, I will put a link below. So make sure you sign up for that because I love talking about things like this. And I try to do that once or twice a month. So every pattern is different. It's, you know, designer's choice how they decide to tackle that. So I'm going to talk about my patterns. I do try to spell it out. I always include a note in the details about how to find your size. But the main thing you want to pay attention to, and this should be across the board, is the finished measurements of that sweater. So I list the finished bust or chest circumference in the front of the pattern in the details, but you can also in any pattern go to the schematic. If it's a sweater, it should have a schematic. And that's the little drawing that includes all the important measurements of that garment. So what you want to do is look at those finished measurements. Now, most patterns should also tell you what they think the ease should be. So for instance, let's use this sweater. I can't exactly remember off the bat, but I'm pretty sure I recommended maybe 8 inches of ease. So that's what we're going to say. We're going to say 8 inches of ease for this sweater. So I've read the little blurb. The designer has told me go for 8 inches of positive ease for your bust. That means I would take my bust measurement, which for me is 35 inches, and then I would add 8, 43 inches. Now I can look at the finished measurements and just find the size closest to that. So regardless, if that sweater has built it in, that designer has chosen to build in the ease with what they list their sizes as, you can ignore that and just focus on the finished measurements. So again, whatever ease they say is the best for that style, add that to your bust, and then look at the finished measurements and find the size closest to that. A lot of times there's also an ease range. And so an extra bonus tip on how to pick maybe where in that range you want to go. Sometimes that's going to be determined just by the sizing. They might, there's always gaps in the sizes. So you might kind of have to go towards one end of the ease or the other to find a size closest to what you're looking for. But a great way to kind of start deciding where on that range you would like to be is by grabbing a sweater you already really like the fit of. It can be a ready-to-wear sweater from your closet. It can be one that you've made. Take that bust measurement minus yours, and that'll give you an amount of ease that you typically like. A couple tips there you just want to think about is pay attention to the style of the shoulder. If it's a drop shoulder sweater, you might not want to measure a raglan or a circular yoke sweater. You kind of want to stay within that same style because a lot of times that determines what kind of ease might look good with that garment. And also, if you are measuring ready to wear, you do want to consider drape in there. We typically will never create a fabric that is the same as something that can be done by a machine because we're always going to be using a thicker yarn at a heavier gauge that's going to be a little uneven because we're humans and not machines. So hopefully that helps, but definitely subscribe to the newsletter for things like that. And